Hello, David. Thank you
Hello.
so much for giving us a bit of your time today to tell us a bit about your new book for What's Happening in Black British History, transnational edition that's going to be happening on the 14th of October. So, what's your new book?
So it's a children's version of my book, Black and British. And there's two versions. There's a version coming out on the 1st of October this year, which is for children around sort of 11, 12 and upwards. And then there's an illustrated version for young children, which is coming out next year. And what happened was at the beginning of this year, having been asked many times about writing for children, I sat down with my publishers and we decided that we were going to do these new versions. And then in the summer, with all of the events that we've lived through, the impetus to do them became all the more strong, and so we did the first of them, the book for children around 12, over the summer, and we did it very, very fast.
Great, and I think I hear that there was a lot of parents begging you to do this.
Well, it's been interesting. I've never really had the desire to write books for children, and I found it quite difficult to write for children. And I know lots of people who write for adults and also write for children. I always admire people who can do that and who have that sort of ambidextry in their writing. So, but what had happened was, because people recognize me because I present as well as produce the programs that I'm known for, is that lots and lots of parents of Black and mixed race kids had asked me and literally stopped me on the streets and said, "I liked your book, but it is kind of 700 and something pages long. You really should write a book, a version of that book for young people. You really should write a children's book." And it had happened so many times that I'd stopped thinking, well, this is a sort of one-off opinion or a few people think this. A lot of people had said it. A lot of people had stopped me on the street to say it. People had written to me to say it. People had said it on social media. So I sort of presumed that maybe they were right and maybe that's what I should do. But also, when I thought about it, for me, the big book that changed my life was Peter Fryer's Staying Power, that I bought when I was 16, when it was a couple of years old. And I wished that I hadn't had to wait to 16 to understand Black British history. I wish I'd known about this history and those biographies at an earlier age. So just thinking about my own story with this history and my own exposure to this history, that created a very sort of obvious mission, which is to write the book that I wish I'd been given when I was at school.
So what impact do you hope it's going to have on your young readers?
Well, I hope it's going to show them that they're part of a long trajectory, which is the thing I didn't know when I was growing up. I knew I was half white working class. I knew I was half Nigerian, and I understood those identities. But I was also a third thing. I was Black and British. And that had no history. It had no background. It had no legitimacy. It wasn't even a phrase that was used when I was growing up. So I'm hoping it'll answer that question. It'll show that this identity of being Black and British has a long history. But I think I'd also like to think that it'll introduce them at a younger age to the incredible people that I met when I read Staying Power in my mid-teens. Because, you know these people and you're responsible for helping exhume some of these stories. But these are, irrespective of issues about race and diversity and inclusive histories, these are just brilliant stories. These are just incredible people. And, the one thing I've learned, probably learned the hard way trying to write for children, is that they love biography. They love stories. They love stories of individuals. And that's what this history abounds with. So I hope that they meet those people the way I met them on the pages of Staying Power. And I hope that it answers questions about identity. But I think it's important also to say that what I would hope for any book about Black British history that was designed to be consumed by young readers is that it would be consumed by young white readers as well. Because, Staying Power answered questions for me, but, my classmates needed those questions delivered to them as well. My school didn't really understand who I was. The idea, if you don't really know anything about the empire, then a sort of Nigerian kid who's also half Geordie living in a school by the banks of the Tyne doesn't really make much sense. So my backstory was invisible to my school and to my classmates. And I think, I know friends from Caribbean backgrounds, again, my age, whose schools never talked about the Atlantic slave trade and New World slavery. And again, their backstories, how they ended up becoming Black and British, are unknown, not just to them, but to their classmates. So I think it's important for classes, for children, both Black and white.
Yeah, that's so important. And, I guess it brings back us to sort of Stewart Hall's phrase of, we're here because you were there. And it's really that simple in a way, isn't it? But it
is. And if you don't know that you were there, and if you don't know that your, ships left, I'm talking to you from Bristol, if you don't know that 2,000 slave trading missions left from the harbour down there, if you don't know that history, then it doesn't make any sense why your class looks the way it does. So, many things come back to things Stewart Hall said, but if you don't know how global Britain's role in the world was and how intertwined the British story is with the people and the land of Africa, then, modern Britain doesn't make sense. And it didn't make sense to me as a child, and I didn't make sense to the people around me when I was a child.
And that's why we've got essential in the title of this one. It's no longer forgotten like the adult version, it's now essential and short, which is great. So, how difficult was it to abridge it sort of and rewrite for children? It
was difficult to stick to rules that I was taught by the editors at Macmillan's children's books. I guess it's just habits, I write books and I write television scripts and I write for newspapers, and I guess I've got the meters of those forms of writing internalized, and learning a new meter is always challenging. But the sort of restrictions, I love the poetic editing of quotes from documents and from speeches, and I go looking for plays, and I go find the voice of the period anywhere I can. And it's quite difficult to use quotes for children, and you can't use them in the sort of fractured way that I do, which I think is probably an artifice of being a TV producer, used to coming in and out of people's spoken word. So those skills that I've learned and that I sort of enjoy deploying aren't really appropriate. But I think most of it's, I find it hard to learn, but they're quite simple rules. But it's just you sort of your fingers follow the habits they've learnt, and they wander the keyboard subconsciously to an extent.
Well, that's the joy of a good editor, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I definitely like to learn the rules myself at some point. Cool.
I'm sure you will. I'm amazed there's not a life of John Blank yet. And as I said, this is about stories and characters and individuals and biographies, and I often think that fiction has to be one of the ways that we center Black history more within British history. I was thinking about so many of these characters, there's no early life or there's no afterlife. We get snatches, they walk on the stage, they say some lines, they often are at the center of events, and then they walk off the stage and you never hear from them again. The number of really significant Black British figures for whom we have not got anything like a full biography. Take someone like Francis Barber, the almost surrogate son of Samuel Johnson. Francis just fades out of the record. He leaves London, and we know real fragments of what happens to him next. So I think fiction has to be. This is not a fiction book, but I think children's fiction and Black British history are a sort of marriage made in heaven.
Yeah, and it's really great to see that some titles are already coming out, like Patrice Lawrence's A Diver's Daughter, which riffs off the story of Jacques Francis, the salvage diver on the Mary Rose.
And Carla's writing a book as well. Carla's writing a book.
The Dark Lady.
Yeah,
so that's going to be great as well, and hopefully it will make its way to television as well. So just one last thing on unless you have one of the other things about the new book that's different from the original adult book is that it's illustrated, right? So it's got maps, photos, portraits. You don't have a copy to hand to wave at the camera, do you?
Somewhere back there. I'll describe it. I'll use the power of words as a writer.
tell us a bit about
Well,
the pictures that that are going to draw the kids in some more and help them understand the stories.
well, I mean, this is really something that I've learned and it's again, it's taking knowledge for granted, which is the sort of big danger when writing for children. I've recently learned is if you talk about the age of exploration, you kind of need to say where the ships went. If you talk about the triangular trade, I think you really need to draw those coastlines and that world. And so the presumed knowledge, which I think lazily I brought into this, just isn't really, you can't presume it that it's there. So they do a lot of that geographical imagining that's needed to be done, but also things, objects, ephemera. I think it's just I remember as a child myself being sort of comforted by pictures. It's not that you're not, you are learning to enjoy the printed word, but you were recently in a world of picture books. So that sort of bridging of illustrated books between the world of pictures and the world of prose, I think is a sort of nice thing. And I remember being very comforted by the presence of pictures in books when I was a child.
Yeah, and I mean, the wonderful thing about reading a book with a young person is that when they see the pictures, it raises new questions in their mind that maybe aren't in the text, and it allows them to engage with those portraits or images or objects themselves, which is all part of the exciting process of learning. All right, well, just thank you again. I mean, unless you have, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say to the What's Happening in Black British History audience.
Other than, I'm sorry, I've missed every one of the last conferences for absolutely ages, including the one when I was on my way to you and the trains broke down, or were they?
And the ones where you were kind of near death in Jamaica at the time.
That's right. Yeah. The one I thought I had.
One day we'll
I've
have.
forgotten the name of the disease that we all thought we had back then.
One day you'll come back as the keynote speaker, won't you?
One day. My apologies. At the moment,
the future of our dreams, where we're allowed to meet in person again.
That would be, return to normality would be lovely. But yeah, my apologies for my inability to schedule being there to talk about obviously a subject that matters a lot to me.
Great. Well, I'm sure everyone will go out and buy a copy for themselves and for all the young people in their lives, and the world is going to become a slightly better place. I also saw that every book that's sold, 50p is going to the Black curriculum. Tell us about that quickly and why you think it's important.
Well, I think it's. I mean, this has been a profound year of change, and it's been change led by young people. And the Black curriculum is led by young Black women, and it's about doing something again which matters a lot to me, which is changing the curriculum, because I don't think it appalls me that the education that I had, with the omissions that I had, that's still largely the case. There's very little, as you know, in the national curriculum, other than in the optional components, that will fill in the gaps, that will explain that we were there, tell the imperial story, tell the story of the Atlantic world. And young people want to change that. And I think the big difference between young people now and when I was young is that they have the internet. They've got access to lots of books on Black British history, and they know they're not being told a full story. When I bought Staying Power as a 16-year-old, it was all a revelation. It was all new. I didn't know any of this stuff existed. It was like, here is everything. Here's the whole. I mean, I could not believe the scale of the history that I didn't know. Now, I don't think young people have that complete absence of knowledge now, because they go looking for it. Because there are lots of books that they can go and buy, and there's television programs, and there's of course the internet and this huge knowledge engine that they have at their fingertips. And so they know that they're not being told the full story. They know that there are omissions. I was unaware of any of this. And because they're aware of omissions, they want to correct omissions. And they're kind of pissed off about it. I meet young people, or I did back when we were able to walk the streets and get on trains and things like that, who again would stop me because they'd recognize me from television, and I'd have these conversations in which they would kind of talk about their education, their history education, with a degree of anger, a degree of feeling let down, that there was a kind of conspiratorial tone that they would feel, that they knew they weren't getting the full story. They knew the curriculum was partial. They knew that there were critical omissions, and that those omissions were the stories that made sense of them, their families, and their background. And they'd gone out looking to fill those gaps. So I think this is being driven by young people, and I really wanted to support that, and the publishers really wanted to support that, and it feels incredibly appropriate thing to do in 2020, a year, as I said, in which progress, which is what I hope and think we've seen some of, has been led by young people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that's a good note to end on. So I'll stop the recording now.